Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this press conference. You are joining us on with BCG. We're going to be discussing the launch of a white paper, Transform and Thrive: How to Win in China's Era of Uncertainties. So as 2019 began, there was an increasing concern about the global economy and the potential chances of a slowdown. And now companies are faced with new macroeconomic conditions and operating in a very challenging environment. So with this paper, BCG will shed some light on how companies can proactively transform themselves and to cope and to thrive in this new era. It also introduces the key steps companies will need to succeed. So we have a very exciting panel. I'd like to introduce each of them, and they'll make some brief statements, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So I'm joined by Fang, the Managing Director and Partner of BCG. We're also joined by Flemming Besenbacher, the Chairman of the Carlsberg Group. And finally, Lars, Fæste, Managing Director and Senior Partner of BCG. So I'm going to turn it over initially to, let's see, who should we start with? Maybe we can get an overview, the overall theme. Lars, could you maybe kind of set the context for us and tell us a little bit about the report overall and why it was written now?
Definitely. Thank you very much for the introduction. The time is really now for the Chinese companies to start thinking about transformation. China has had a run of 2-3 decades of more or less uninterrupted, very, very strong growth. And we can see that there's a number of things on the horizon. The tariff situation is just one, but actually many other things. Changes in the demand, changes in labor cost, digital attackers, companies that are thinking through where should they place the supply chains. And therefore, I would say all of a sudden the Chinese executives are in a situation where not everything is just growing into the sky anymore. There are businesses that are either flat or declining, businesses that needs to be taken care of. And that's why it's very important to be ahead of this curve, to start transforming before the trouble comes. And I think the most dangerous thing in business today is to be proud. You need to be paranoid. And even when you're at the best of your game, you need to think about what can you do more. Are we seeing the opportunities and the threats around the corner? So we put out this white paper, and we say that there are 5 things that the Chinese leaders, they need to think about. Number 1 is they need to really start thinking about efficiency driving excellence in the operations. We see a lot of companies that are not fully at world class yet on transparency, on how they perform procurement, supply chain, commercial disciplines. They need to get this right. Number 2 is really to get the commercial or the revenue growth in place to win in the medium to long term. You cannot save yourself to victory, so you also need to get the commercial and the top line to work. Number 3 is you need to have a long-term orientation. It's not enough to save money and perform today. You also need to invest into the future. R&D, for instance, investing into digital. Many companies are very focused on CapEx, investing into hardware, steel. Actually, the more attractive for most businesses is to invest into R&D, intellectual capabilities, digital, new business model, and so on. And finally, most companies, they need a formal transformation program. We see companies that have one program, one umbrella effort that they run, perform better than companies that have 10, 20, 30 disparate initiatives going on. So in this paper that we have launched today, we have 4 examples. We have Alibaba and how they went through a turnaround in 2001. We have HSBC, how they went through their transformation after the Lehman Brothers crisis in 2009. We have PSA that is owned by Dongfeng, how they have turned around the Peugeot car division. And then we have Carlsberg and their transformation that Flemming Besenbacher will talk about in a minute.
Excellent. Thank you. And so maybe we can get more of a deep dive into China. Fang, could you take us there?
Sure. Very happy to.
Since the majority are here, are Chinese, so I will speak in Chinese. In the report, we have this idea: you need to prepare for the uncertainties. because when the uncertainties are the new normal, you have to be fully alert on two aspects. If you focus on the left hand, it's on cost and efficiency. As Lars said, you need to manage your lean organization, your supply chain, your R&D efficiency, etc., etc. You can raise your short-term achievements. But on the other hand, how to build your dynamism. So on the one hand is organizational resilience, the other is your organizational dynamism. In terms of business models, what are your innovations? Do you need to have digital transformation? And through what kind of business models can you ensure more revenue or expand into new markets? A lot of companies do not stop or slow down in going global. When they go global, still they are forging ahead bravely. So we talk about managing resilience on one hand and dynamism on the other hand. Let's look at the example of Alibaba. Around 2000, there was the bubble of the internet. Alibaba ran into some crisis. On the one hand, they optimized the cost structure, but more importantly, they leveraged this opportunity to rebuild their own corporate culture. So they used a lot of knacks. So they asked the sales guys back to build their own corporate culture. On the basis of that, they reviewed their strategy. In the past, that was only for high-end B2B, but they made it deeper. And in the past, it was only B2B, but they went to B2C. And they had a better supply chain management. And it's great because Taobao developed from there. So you need to be careful when you're in good days. And before crisis strike, you need to make sure you have both resilience and dynamism. This is the essence of the report.
Thank you very much for that. I think now would be a great time to turn to the chairman of Carlsberg to give us a bit more of an in-depth dive into a case study.
Well, as some of you may know, Carlsberg is, in my opinion, a fantastic company with a fantastic history and a fantastic heritage. Founded back in 1847. In 1876, the founder decided actually to establish a foundation. And this foundation today is still the main controlling shareholder of Carlsberg. The foundation has 30% of the shares, but given the fact that we have around 98% of all A shares, we have 76% of the votes of General Assembly. It is correct that has been said here, as Lars mentioned, that Carlsberg has recently been in a fantastic transition here. The most important job of a chairman is to hire the right CEO, and late 2014, early 2015, I onboarded Kees de Hart. Kees came from the Netherlands, was CEO of Friesland Campina, and Kees de Hart joined us in 2015. And I must say that transition since 2015, headed by Kees de Hart, has actually been fantastic. And of course, I'm a very pleased chairman today, and you'll see the share price today is the highest ever. Yesterday, I gave a talk about Carlsberg in another session, and I said there was 4P, which is important for Carlsberg. Of course, for any company, I mean, P for profit. I mean, if your financial powerhouse is not in order, you are not in business any longer. And Kees introduced what he called the golden triangle, meaning that the top line, the margin, and the profit should be in balance. It doesn't help you only grow the top line if you don't earn any money. And actually, I mean, this has functioned since then. He introduced a new strategy back in 2015, which was called Sail 22. And combined with that, he also introduced a cost and efficiency program, which actually BCG helped Kees in implementing here, and that was called Funding the Journey. And it was said there that we should take around 3 billion Danish kroner. Half of them should be reinvested in the business, and the other half should be giving back to shareholders. And this has actually introduced a new mindset of running Carlsberg, this constant challenge of taking out costs and making things more lean, more efficiency. I would say the Funding the Journey program is more or less over now, but now this mentality of working constantly, looking, see where can you take out costs, where can you take out efficiencies, is now embedding in our strategy. At the same time, focusing on the growth strategy and reinvesting in the business. Cees and his group managing team was actually reinvesting in the business. And I must say also during these 3 years, China has been a fantastic growth story for Carlsberg. If I look at the growth rate at Carlsberg, the numbers here for China is just astonishing. But let me turn to the 4 P's. So P for profit. The next P is P for purpose. Carlsberg is a purpose-driven company and has been so since we actually was started. And the purpose of Carlsberg is brewing for a better world today and tomorrow, which is fully embedded in our strategy today. The next P is P for the planet. You cannot run a business today without also actually taking care of the planet, and not least the climate change we're all facing today. And Cees also introduced a new, very visionary sustainability program, which is called Towards Zero. We will have no carbon emission from our brewers and no water waste in 2030. And that has again, I mean, to be quite honest, we don't really know how to reach this 2030 goal. But at least for me, also being a scientist and professor, it has been exciting to see how much new creativity and new innovation power that has also raised internally in the company. And we also have a 22 goal which we have to reach, and I'm fully convinced that we will reach these 2022 goals, and hopefully then we will also reach all the way to 2030. So planet and sustainability is also very much embedded in the Carlsberg strategy, which fits exactly with our purpose, brewing for a better world today and tomorrow. And the final P is for P for people. I mean, I think for any companies today, we have been living in a century where capital was the limiting factor. And I think we're moving into the 21st century where actually talent and people will be the limiting factor. So those companies who has the right people with the right competencies on the right position, they will be the winners for tomorrow. And that applies both for the young talents in the company, but it also applies for the more executive senior people in the company. And again, if I look at Carlsberg, P for the profit, P for the purpose, P for the planet, but also P for people. There's been a major transition also in people skills in Carlsberg. And I think again, Cees should be praised for doing that. So I think we have a much stronger Carlsberg today with a very interesting growth market in China here. So let me finish with that for the time being here.
Okay. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think we moved through each of our panelists here. I'd like to invite the journalists in the audience. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand and my colleague will come around with the mic. Excellent, we have one right there. And if you could just introduce the name of your news outlet as well.
Okay. I'm a journalist with 21st Century Business Herald. And I would like to ask Mr. Besenbacher. And my question is, since early 2018, China has announced a series of measures to further open up its markets. Has any of these measures benefit you, your company, or your industry for foreign companies? And in the past 2 years, have you? What are the biggest changes you have witnessed in Chinese market? And what have you done to adapt this new situation? And I also want to ask your company's operation in China. Do you have any expansion plan? And how happy are you about your profitability in China? Thank you.
Well, I mean, many questions. China is an interesting market, and we have actually been exported beer to China since 150 years. Today, I believe we have 27 brewers in China. And again, I mean, some of the key aspects of the Sales 22 strategy is, well, first of all, core beers. We have many both international power brands like Carlsberg and Tuborg, 1664. But a big part of our volume is actually also local Chinese brands. And we use all sort of our competencies internationally also to embed that in the local Chinese breweries here. Also improving these breweries, not only with respect to efficiency and taking out costs, but actually also them more sustainable, what I told you before with water savings and energy savings and so forth here. I think again that we have an excellent management team here in China, and they are focusing on sort of marketing. They are focusing now also, as Lars mentioned here before, investing in R&D in our Carlsberg Research Laboratory, taking some of these products back to China here. We recently relaunched Carlsberg. We have recently also invested more in some more premium beers here. And finally, we are also actually investing right now in digital transformation in Carlsberg. So also investing now in long-term growth of Carlsberg. And that also applies here in China right now.
Thank you for your question. We have another one right there.
你好，我就用中文了。
Allow me to use Chinese. We're with Sheng Sixing, a strategic and consulting-based media. Just now, you had a very good case of Alibaba transformation. I think domestic media knows Ali have a belief in practice, and many of the Chinese companies have certain doubt of the consulting companies' series. Well, in the scenario just mentioned for Alibaba, they have executive from GE and adopted their strategy. How do you evaluate other companies' experience on your own transformation? How can you make a good use of other experience to make a good transition? Thank you.
我们这个报告中呢，实际上有
There is a core value in our report. That is, you need to look at both the big picture and look at its locality or details. You need to come up with the general ideas for a fast win or 100-day plan or middle to long-term plan. When you do the work, you need to do that step by step in a practical way. That is the methodology you mentioned. Having a big picture is very important for us. But when you implement that, we also hope we have our case not only about Ali, but including Carlsberg and HSBC. That are the actual case when BCG work together with our client to do a good transformation. In that process, we would have some both experience and lessons learned. So we emphasized those two-hand theory. Short term, you want fast win, liquidity, and revenue. After you have that cash flow, you need to turn to another side, that is to transformation, like digitalization. There is another case we did not cover specifically about HSBC. In that transition, they started by diversify themselves, and they want to simplify their organization and have that money go back to digital transformation.
Just add to the point that you make around consultants, and some people are skeptical about the ability to add value. I think BCG, what we are focused on, and also here in China, is to work shoulder to shoulder with the management and the organization that we work with. And instead of writing studies, we work as performance partner, end to end until the money is there. And also very often we link our fee to the result. So we have moved on from a model that many have criticized and where many other consultants are writing studies to being a performance partner.
Thank you very much for your question. Do we have any other questions? This gentleman.
我想问，
I have a question about leadership. I saw in the report you said you need to do some work about leadership, what we call the jazz leadership. We talk about the automobile. Many of the leaders talking about the autonomous driving or smart and connected vehicle, including technologies about AI. What kind of change would they take? Especially they went from heavy manufacturing to heavy digitalization. What exactly does this digitalization means? We have a very general definition. Do you have a more detailed way how do we transform the leaders? What kind of leaders can adapt to the current era, especially for manufacturing? Okay, we have such a concept that it is a double edge for both organization and leadership. Take organization perspective. For manufacturing, just mentioned, the hierarchy organizations do have its room because they emphasize to have a good plan and good implementation. Top down is a very good way for hierarchy. Another good thing is they can build professional capacity. During transition, we still suggest keeping some of the old organizational method. The other way is what we call agile organization. It has to do with digital transformation and innovation. In an innovative scenario, we hope that this organization can adapt to this situation with high agility. And conventional organization and innovative organization need also to interact with each other. So going back to the leadership, on one hand, we have the conventional one with the conductor on the top. So it's a top-down. We talk about process, speed, and efficiency. So this is something like the symphony. But on the other hand, we have something like jazz. You cannot have one leader to do the job. So this kind of group leadership works better for jazz. So we talked about the shared leadership, more mistake tolerance. You work with your client in a quicker and closer way. So in the future, we would have two different kind of leadership, both for symphony and for jazz.
Could you also jump in and contribute a little bit on the leadership angle? I know you talked a little bit more about this from earlier on, but any other points to add?
Yeah, I think it's as I said before, I think the strongest management teams are the ones that are questioning themselves and being paranoid, frankly. And paranoia is not a nice state of mind, but it is important in business. And resting on the laurels is not good. And therefore, having a team that is hard on themselves, pushing themselves, also renewing themselves, I think frequently taking in diversity, new ideas for innovation is important. And then I think to Fang's point around jazz leadership, what we often do is we try to create some new routines in the way you manage the business, because very often you have this orchestra or symphony orchestra model with very strong silos, where you have somebody is optimizing quality, somebody is optimizing production, procurement, and they all do it in splendid isolation of each other. And so how do you create routines where you break this and where you, on a very fast weekly basis or daily basis, create routines where you connect these things? And also, our experience is that young talent, they want to play in a jazz orchestra. It's very difficult to get people in to a model that is very planned and where you execute to a strong direct line.
And Flemming, I know you wanted to jump in as well.
Well, I mean, in Carlsberg, there is a saying called Symbartens, meaning it's always burning, always challenging ourselves, trying to ask what can we do better tomorrow than today. And this Symbartens come back to some of our founders. And I think that very much captures what Lars is saying here. Although it's now going fine for Carlsberg, the worst thing we can do is sort of relaxing and lean back and say everything is fine. You constantly have to be agile also in a world which is changing constantly. And I fully share also Lars's opinion about, I mean, some of the youngsters, the young talents in the company would really like to play in a jazz orchestra because they also, I think their creativity, their innovation power should be fully unleashed in an organization. And I think the symphony orchestra, if we take this term here, I think the biggest risk there is that you build up these silos. And there's a big risk that these silos do not interact, maybe sometimes even compete with others, and that can be damaging for the company. So I think also in the top level executive, I mean, this shared leadership, where actually it's not only one person, the CEO in the corner office to take all the decision. There's a group of people which actually constantly challenge themselves, ask questions, ask all the questions which should be done. And then finally, of course, by the end of the day, if the CEO sees that some of these silos starts to sort of compete with each other, I mean, that's his or her job to sort of avoid that, because that can be really be damaging. I think silo thinking in a modern ways of leadership is really damaging.
Shared collaborative leadership,
Yep.
One of the takeaways. And we had a question in the front row earlier. Maybe there's another. Okay.
Question for Mr. Besenbacher. And you just mentioned the importance of talents in the development of companies, and as known to all, every year Carlsberg will donate 30% of its dividends to the society, because the founder concerned himself with the scientific development. And also in Carlsberg, the biochemist invented the pH scale. So we want to know in Carlsberg, how do you encourage your employees to create, to invent, to conduct scientific research?
Well, thank you for your question. I think there's two parts of that question. As you correctly point out, and thank you for asking the question, is that we have a foundation. And the foundation was established with two purposes. One of them is managing the company, and that's why I'm also chairman today of the Carlsberg company. Creating well today, and some of the profit and actually the dividend from the shares from the foundation in the company is actually giving back to society. One of the sort of mindset of the founder was actually sharing and giving back. And the Carlsberg Foundation donates every year around 500 million kroner to basic fundamental research. And many of these money is actually not least giving to young talents trying to do basic fundamental research. But as you know today, many of the grand challenges in our society is often solved by young talents with coming up with some new break ideas. In the other aspect, in the company as such, I know that Cees de Hart is also focusing right now on onboarding young talents in any part of the organization. And I think these new young talents with their creativity and your new mindset is very important for the Carlsberg. And if we go to the Carlsberg Research Laboratory, it has been existing again since 1876. And I know actually that Boston Consulting had worked with the Birgitte Skovhage, who is new director of the research laboratory out there. They are focusing on raw materials like barley, for example, yeast, brewing technology and ingredients. And although you may say today that making a beer, brewing a beer is trivial, there's a lot of new research in this research laboratory, which is, as I see it, a very strong asset for Carlsberg. Developing a new type of yeast, developing new type of barleys which are climate resistant, inputting new ingredients, new flavors and so forth here. So that's really a strong asset to Carlsberg. And that's one of the areas which actually some of the money from Fang is now also reinvested in this Carlsberg Research Laboratory.
Thank you for your question. And we had a question in the back row.
Hi, Mr. Besenbacher. I'm a journalist from China Business Network. So my question is, I have two questions. First is, I know you are a member of Chinese Academy of Science. So my question is that how do you think basic research is important to your business, and how Carlsberg develop its research team? And second question is that I saw your comments in Davos early this year. You say that you're optimistic, but you fear that pessimism will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So now how do you think about that? And is the prophecy became true, or? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Well, as I said, science is an embedded of Carlsberg and has been since it was founded. And the founder strongly believed in science. He established the Carlsberg's Research Laboratory. At that time, it was not trivial to make beer. So one of the breakthrough inventions within the brewing technology was actually one of the professors of the Carlsberg Research Laboratory actually developing the yeast for lager beer. And again, you may say that this patent is protected, but he was not that type of person. He actually shared that invention with all brewers, both in Denmark and abroad. Today, we are still investing heavily in the Carlsberg Research Laboratory. And as I said before, in order to, among other things, fulfill our sustainability strategy, it's not least sort of the scientists of the Carlsberg Research Laboratory. That means that cutting down the amount of water, the energy area here, but also developing new type of yeast, more efficient yeast, new types of barley with the climate change we're seeing around the world. Cees have recently onboarded a group of postdocs which actually will help together with the Carlsberg Research Laboratory, investing in that. And we're also investing heavily from the Carlsberg Foundation in the Carlsberg Research Laboratory. So research is very much embedded in the Carlsbergs, both historically and also today. As you know, I mean, I'm a scientist. I was professor in nanoscience and still is, and was for 10 years directing a nanoscience center before I then became chairman of Carlsberg. I'm actually honorary professor at 16 Chinese University and foreign member of the Chinese Academy of Science. So I strongly believe also investing in research and development. Just before I came here was in a session with Premier Li Keqiang, and I also there greatly acknowledged China for their long-term investment in education, research, development, and innovation. And I'm pretty sure today that if you look at some of the grand challenges in our society today with climate change, keeping the temperature on the globe below 1.5 degree, the biodiversity, the environment and so forth. One way actually to combat that is actually investing in research development. So I firmly believe in that. Concerning optimism and pessimism, sometimes when I walk around, and especially in Davos every year, last year very many was pessimistic view about Brexit, about Europe, about the trade war between China and US and so forth here. And if we all run around and sort of speak about negative things and being pessimistic, I think this could actually have an influence on all the way we are doing business. So I think Winston Churchill once said that a pessimist is, an optimist is seeing opportunities even if there's difficulties, whereas a pessimist is actually seeing difficulty even though there is maybe some possibilities out there. And I'm a firm optimist here, although I realize that the world is very challenging today, and we have some of the environmental challenges, we have also political challenges and so forth. And again, I believe that if you look at the world today, we have a much better world today than we ever had. And I think one of the instruments there is free trade in our world today. And I'm very optimistic on the future, but there are challenges and we have to combat these challenges.
And I'd like to extend that question to our BCG panelists. Are you seeing businesses being generally pessimistic in their plannings for the year ahead, or is it cautious optimism, pure optimism? What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, I agree with Flemming Besenbacher. I'm also an optimist, and I think that it was always difficult. It's not just now that it was difficult. There was always clouds on the horizon, sometimes a bit more than others. But if you look at the bigger scheme of things, there are so many things that are positive today. And what I find is it's very energizing to be in Asia. And to work and live in China is very energizing. And there's a lot of opportunities, and even though you can read every day in the newspaper and get downbeat news from any direction you want, there are so many opportunities to make things better, to grow, to develop new things, and build businesses. And I think the further you go, to Europe, unfortunately, but also the United States, I think there are more pessimistic people and more complaining, and people that are seeing the holes in the cheese instead of the cheese.
Final words?
Yep. On China. 如果谈到中国的话，
When you talk about China, we said there could be ups and downs. And you see ups and downs can be very frequent in 3-year frame or even shorter time frame. We are used to the speed. So what is the worst? We always tell the customer, what is the result of the test and what is the scenario analysis? But on the other hand, we still have population dividend. But this current population dividend is totally different from the past dividend. In the past, it was more on the total quantity, but now it's more on quality of the talents. Each year, we educate a lot of university graduates, then they become middle class and consumers. So either from supply side and demand side, you could see there is a huge market with energy, and the energy is there. So prepare for the worst. Ensure you have resilience, but you have to embrace the resilience and also embrace the dynamism with innovation.
I think we have final words.
In Chinese, I think there's a saying is that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And actually, I think this partnership, also if you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I'm normally saying number 17, partnerships, incredibly important. No company, no country can do this alone here. We have to work together here. We are collaborating with partners around the world in Carlsberg here. And I think on the bigger scale here, I think it's very important also to establish partnership between different regions in the world to solve some of these issues here. Because if I read some of the climate panel reports, I hope really we'll manage to keep the temperature on the globe below 1.5 degree, because the difference between 1.5 degree and 2 degree is really dramatic. And that really requires both leadership and partnership in the world.
That was the perfect way to end this. So he's going to host the next press conference, not me. Thank you very much to my panelists and to the journalists here and to those joining us on the live stream. Thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.